Good morning, vital community, crime community. I'm here to finish reading the last of this chapter. It's called In the Library of Lies, a literary autopsy. Only a handful of bona fide novelists who've drawn inspiration from the Manson theme have been honest enough to admit that they were writing fiction. With the supposed nonfiction we've examined, Manson-based novels were largely been produced by lesser practitioners of the craft. The early 1970s saw a string of pulp novels in the mystery, thriller, and horror genres concerning the exploits of drug-crazed hippie murder cults. Many of the strangely familiar wide-eyed guru glared from the gaudy covers of their cheap potboilers. Two of the most particular of the sordid subgenre of Manson's horror fiction came from Germany. Both of them serve as sterling examples of how far from reality the supernatural nature of the Manson mystique has developed in the collective unconsciousness. The Michael Hobart's 1982 novel Hitler's Tochter, Hitler's Daughter, the title character travels to the California desert in 1969 to party with Manson and in turn on her dad's bestseller, Mein Kampf. The Manson character shares an LSD-laced coke with the Fuhrer's child, and she helps to inspire him to order the Cielo Drive murders. Slithering out from an even deeper level of pulp culture dementia is the 1982 erotic novel Geliebte des Satans, Mistress of Satan, credited to Shirley MacLaine. The plot shamelessly plagiarizes the basic story and characters of Polanski's Rosemary's Baby and fuses the scenario with the satanic speculations about the Cielo Drive murders. The novel ends with a pornographic scene in which the diabolical guru, Jesse Owen, invades the mainstream of movie star Christabel Farlow and orders his half-naked witches from Spa Farm to kill the pigs. In its vulgar blue of voyeuristic Hollywood fantasy, trashy pseudo-occultism, and rumors about the murders, Gillette des Satans distills popular imaginations about Manson into their apocalyptic essence. Even Bugliosi lent his inventive hand on Manson-esque fiction. This was labeled such as with his 1981 crime novel, Shadow of Cain. This DA's thinly disguised tale centers on the notorious mass murderer who commits new heinous crimes when he's released from prison. To date, only one generally gifted novelist has turned his imagination to Manson. In his 1983 science fiction apocalypse, Hello America, J.G. Ballard, the surrealistic sage of Shepperton, tells a helter-skelter tale of failure future. The dystopian hallucination features a devotee of Manson who became president of the post-nuclear United States in the Las Vegas desert. A less visionary sci-fi treatment of the theme is found in Wenzel Brown's Possessives and Conquerors, 1975, which presents Manson as a visiting extraterrestrial whose mission is the destruction of mankind. Novelist Jerry Kosinski, haunted by Fratowski's death, conjured that Cielo Drive murders frequently on his own work. The best known of Kosinski's further fictionalizations of the helter-skelter myth is Blind Date. But even as late as in his career as 1988, numerologically obsessed, The Hermit of 69th Street, Kosinski writes in a seemingly parody of inaccurate media coverage of his friend's murder. On the eve of August 9th, 1969, 891-1969, a lovely hamlet of Hollywood's Prince Hamlet in Destiny City, California, was invaded in the prince's absence by a doomsday daddy gang, composed of three American desert foxes distinguished as passion flower holy men. The stimulus-starved gang cut open Ophelia's silken throat with a straight razor, and then they danced on her belly until the baby was expected in a week, was no longer kicking. The Los Angeles Transit. Norman Mailer, like Capote and Kosinski, also experimented with the using novelistic techniques to tell true stories, making a firm belief in fiction mysterious, prophetic powers, is the only author to have claimed to have written a Manson novel before anyone ever heard of Manson. In 1966, as remembered later, he begun to think of a novel so odd and so horrible that I hesitated for years to begin it. I imagined a group of 7 or 8 bikers, hippies, and studs, plus a girl or two, living in the scrub thickets that sat on some of the valleys between the dunes. I conceived them of making supernatural trips from the dunes into town where, out of the sheer boredom of the existence, not nearly intense enough to study their health, they would commit murders and massive brutality and then slip back into the dunes. I saw a string of such crimes. I was, as I say, in fear of the book. The novel in my mind seemed more a magical object than a fiction, a black magic. Mailer began to write a novel in the spring of '66. He started with what was intended to be a prelude from a pair of young Texan boys who go on a hunting trip to Alaska. As he expanded on this plot, the Alaskan hunting expedition ended up in the entire book. He called it Why Are We in Vietnam? Mailer never did develop his original idea of hippie murders haunting the dunes, later recalled when Sharon Tate was murdered in the summer of '69 and the world heard of Charles Manson. I would wonder what state of guilt I might have been in if I had written that novel of desert murders. How and then could I have ever been certain that Manson had not been sensitive to its message of the tribal air? Odder still, through Mailer's appears not to have known enough about the case to realize the significance of this detail. That was the main character of Where Are We in Vietnam is named Tex. If I were Ed Sanders, I'd been tempted and add OEO. Blackbird Singing in the Dead of Night, the life of Charles Manson, is a fictional volume depicted in some detail in Parisha Pezel's acclaimed campus murder mystery, Special Topics on Calamity Physics, 2006. The fictional number of the Manson book, J. Burns Ives, is lauded as one character for explaining the origins and the codes of the Manson's ideology. Ives' study has been described as the definitive biography. Pelosi's heroine, whose name happens to be Blue, is the daughter of the left-wing radical college professor who teaches a class called Charlie Characteristics at a Political Rebel. In the professor's lecture, he says that Manson possessed the it factor, charisma. He had it. So did Zappa. Guevara, like Che Guevara. Who else? Lucifer. You've born with that. The certain je ne quoi. And according to history, you can move with relatively little effort a group of ordinary people to take up guns and fight for your cause, whatever it is. The nature of the cause actually matters very little. We later discover that the heroine's father and the mysterious female teacher who became a mentor to her are actually former members of the violent Weather Underground, like terrorist movement, who are now fugitives from the law. The influence of Blackbird Singing in the Dead of Night on this secret society's activism is hinted at throughout the novel. Obviously, Pessy's radical intellectual character buys into that aspect of the Manson myth, which insists that he orders dimensions to kill for him. But Special Topics of Calamity Physics reveals some interest sophisticated in the development of the myth. It's the only fictional treatment of Manson which emphasizes the radical political dominions of his teachings and even aspects that he actually does have an ideology. It's strange, and more than even 40 years after Manson's coming into infamy, no author in the real world has yet produced anything like the definitive biography which Pessl created in her novel. In the last days of the '60s, says the book cover blurb on Zachary Lasar's novel Surrey in 2008, the worlds of the Rolling Stones and the Charles Manson accidentally converged during the decade's most toxic moment. Lazar's exotic narrative uses the relationship between Bobby Beausoleil and the filmmaker Kenneth Anger as a device to show the links between life with Manson and the Spahn Ranch and the doomed final days of Rolling Stones' Brian Jones. Later admits that his book is a meditation on the ways that several public lives were detached from the realm of fact and became a kind of contemporary folklore. But this curiously flat period piece never convincingly conveys the hallucinatory late 60s atmosphere Lazar strives to create. And even allowing for poetic license, it's hard to reconcile Lazar's rather anemic depictions of Manson and anger with the demonstrative human beings he based his imagings on. The flawed attempt to capture the Manson phenomenon, his serious literature, is also handicapped by Lazar's state using of Bugliosi's Helter Skelter as his only source of information on Manson. The printed matter represented itself as supposed nonfiction about Manson in recent years. 2 volumes served to illustrate developing trends in the Manson myth's continuing evolution. St. Martin's Press published Jeff Braven's Squeaky, The Life and Times of Lynette Alice Fromm in 1997. Manson is only peripheral to Braven's study of Fromm's life. The Squeaky marks a small turning point. It's the first book offered by a major mainstream publisher that doesn't portray Manson as a psychopathic, murderous character we encountered in all of the other mass marketing volumes in which he appears. As the meticulous Fromme noted in her corrected page correspondence to him, Braven is not always accurate. For instance, Kentucky Hillbilly Manson certainly doesn't have the strange, scratchy, flat Midwestern male voice Braven ascribes to him. But Braven's refreshingly neutral and non-judgmental approach persists that the reader to form a far more realistic understanding of Manson's philosophy than previously works have allowed. On the other hand, Fromme's disputed many of Braven's claims about her childhood and has complained that he didn't consult her concerning the biography's accuracy until the book was already completed. In 1998, St. Martin's Press also released Taming of the Beast by Edward George and Daley Matera. The book itself is unexceptional, but the background story of how it comes into publish tells us much about how the mainstream media has always dealt with Manson. What George himself reveals about the making of the book and his correspondence with Lynette Fromm and Manson serves as a perfect illustration of the Manson industry's cynical marketing methods. Edward George, a prison administrator, got to know Manson during his San Quentin period and was generally fond of him. He originally wrote the book covering his long career called Confessions of a Prison Administrator, which was intended to be an appeal for prison reform. Manson was only included in 4 chapters. In 1995, George Agent hadn't been able to sell his book, so he suggested emphasizing the Manson angle. The co-writer named Daley Matera was hired to, as if George went to Lynette Fromm in 1996. Kick out a lot of my stuff that has nothing to do with Charlie and add some other good stuff. All true stuff, some rumors, some speculation stuff, some wild-ass stuff, etc. In 1997, the title had been changed by the publisher from Confessions of a Private Administrator to The Brother's Keeper, the created prison life of Charles Manson. By 1970, June 30 of 97, a disillusioned George wrote to Fromme, I wish I never contracted to do it. I've been a pain, a real agony, fighting with Darrow legal departments, editors, changes, etc. I've sure learned about the publishing business, New York, Hollywood, etc. In September 29th, 97, George wrote to Manson personally to apologize for what had become titled Taming the Beast. I should be ashamed. My book, which isn't really mine anymore, is in New York being souped up, made to sizzle, embellished. Everybody's adding to the story, lots of bullshit. Want you to be humming between, they want you to be a monster. They are changing the name too. I've lost control. But it's all will be hot, I think. It's all kind of shit now. On December 13th, 97, George complained to Manson, they don't even ask my opinion. They just change things. So it's like you're a beast. You've got lots of beast in you, and I'm supposed to tame the beast out of you. So after 25 years, a nice guy and ready for parole, such craziness sells books. And if you, like you always said, New Yorkers play the money game and they write out what sells. They're fighting all the time for what goes into the book. Of course, when the editors get my stuff and they stretch for it, sensationalize it and make it a sizzle, that's what makes it, I guess. When the processed product finally hit the market, you could just barely detect the buried traces of George's attempt to present Manson as a human being, but the co-writer and publisher had added so much of the unusual, sensational Manson myths to the mix. George's original intention to tell an honest story of prison life was all but lost. Further cheapening that had begun as a serious work, the captions in the photo sections are printed in the kind of corny typeface usually used to advertise horror movies. Taming the Beast features many long Manson monologues. We are led to believe that they are taken verbatim from George's conversations with him in prison, but the questionable veracity of these Manson quotes was apparent to me as soon as I read the scene in which Manson is first shown laying his stream of consciousness wrap on George, who has just met. In fact, it was strung together from the philosophy sections of the Manson's Files, first 1988 edition, and printed in the same exact sequence in which I arranged these quotes. This can only cause the readers to wonder how many of the other supposedly verbatim Manson quotes in Taming of the Beast were lifted from other sources, taken out of context, or invented altogether. While this may seem as a minor quibble, such editorial toyings with the truth must cast doubt on the integrity of the book as a whole. Proper attribution as quotes as a particularly sensitive issue when it comes to Manson. He had his words twisted and reinvented by everyone from the Beach Boys to Bugliosi, and even to the one book that pretended to be in his own words. The 30 years after Manson's arrest, the publishing industry was unwilling to allow for an impartial portrayal of the media's favorite contemporary villain that didn't rely on the old stereotypes. In the cultural front, Helter Skelter's 40th anniversary saw professional enigma and 60s literary icon Thomas Pynchon bring Manson into the realm of high literature by releasing the nostalgic hippie noir novel In Verite Vice. Set in 1970 Los Angeles psychedelic underground during the height of the public fascination was the Tate LaBianca trial. Inherent Vice invokes the Manson mythos throughout its meandering pot-smoking choke plot of dope and detectives. One of Saichon's characters expresses a sexual fetish for Charlie's chicks, who are frequently used to symbolize the hippie generation's lost innocence. Although Pynchon's previous paranoid and counterculture conspiracy novels questions the establishment versions of history, Inherent Vice is disappointingly conservative in its acceptance of the mainstream myth Bugliosi invented. As we enter the second decade of the 21st century, it remains to be seen if even enough time has yet passed to allow the truth to prevail. My perhaps jaundiced suspicion is that the cover-up between covers that began with Lawrence Schiller's scam in 1970 will continue to be the Manson myth main literary legacy. Most of the above was written in the 2011 edition of this book. I said that there is about the few notable volumes since then in the preface. Naturally, the cottage industry will continue to metastasize regurgitations of the lies for infinity. It gets to the point where taking notes of the latest mediocrities becomes redundant. Just as I acknowledge the words of O'Neill and Peppenberg, Stimson, Fromm, Day, and Melnick, if the only true worthwhile studies on the subject in the past decade, I must remiss to my duties that I'm not to hand out two special awards for the worst major publisher volumes in the address our topic. Congratulations, Fox News, alternative fact specialist Liz Wheel. Your atrocious Hunting Charles Manson 2018 reached a new nadir. Only Jeff Gowen, the media's new go-to guy for rehashed lies, and the poor man's Bugliosi attained comparable dishonor with his hacked work, Manson, The Life and Times of Charles Manson. That's going to end this chapter. And the next chapter is called Cindy Manson. I guess that's about all the movies that we've made about our friends here. Okay, so we say thank you to Nick and Charlie and all the vinyl community. And if you've been following my stream at all and you like it at all and you think I'm speaking any truth out there to the vinyl community and the crime community, then I would love to enjoy your subscription, like, and subscribe. God bless the children.